You're walking through a local museum on a quiet afternoon. The limestone walls are cool to the touch. The old wooden floors creak softly beneath your feet. But this wasn't just a shelter. It was a poorhouse. A place for the most vulnerable. You stop to read a display about the people who lived here and the people who died here. Then you hear it. A little girl laughing. You turn, but the gallery's empty. Then, out of the corner of your eye, you catch a flash of something at the end of the hallway. Was that a little girl? Small, quick, and then gone. Before you know it, you're following her deeper into the building. Then, a hand closes around your arm. It's a staff member. Their eyes are wide, and in a hushed voice they say, "Don't."
If you see or hear a little girl, don't talk back to her. Don't trust the little girl.
I'm Nadine Bailey, and this is Haunted Canada. Today, I'm joined by Katie Clark, the Heritage Programmer, for an episode that is unlike most ghost stories, because this one has names, dates, and records that still exist. This is Ledger of the Forgotten, the Poorhouse of Wellington County Museum and Archives. The archives at the Poorhouse were usually pretty complete. They included admission ledgers, medical notes, and even death records. Elderly farmers who lost their land, widows without family, men injured and unable to work, children who had nowhere else to go. They tell us who came here and why. Because entry into the house of industry and refuge often meant one thing. You are not expected to leave this grand limestone building that overlooks the manicured lawn and the Grand River Valley below. But long before European settlers arrived to this land, it was home to the Mississaugas and the Six Nations. The Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Sinaga, and Tuscarora for thousands of years. European settlement in Wellington County began in the early 1800s. The county itself was named in 1838 in honor of Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, a British military hero who defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. Settlers were drawn to the rolling farmland, forests, and rivers that wound through the countryside. Many of them came seeking a fresh start. Fergus was among the earliest communities to take root in the county. It was founded in 1838 by Scottish settlers Adam Ferguson and James Webster. They hoped to attract families from across Scotland and beyond, and under their direction, they built mills along the Grand River, roads were constructed, and the foundation of what would become a prosperous farming community began to take shape. To be successful, families had to clear land by hand, endure harsh winters, and rely on one another to survive. Some prospered, while others struggled, and many fell through the cracks entirely. And by the 1870s, Wellington County had a growing problem. What would they do with those who could not care for themselves? The elderly without families, unwed mothers and their children, sick people with nowhere to recover, the blind, disabled, and destitute. By 1877, the county had constructed an answer in the form of a grand limestone building perched on the top of a rolling hill, the House of Industry and Refuge, better known as a poorhouse.
The building and the site surrounding it has always been owned and operated by the County of Wellington. It was a site built in 1877 for a whopping $3,000. And the idea was that it was a start or a step forward into social services. It's in a central location within the County of Wellington, so it was a very convenient location to be in. The official name of the building was the House of Industry and Refuge. Everyone locally knew it as the Poorhouse, though.
That's Katie Clark, the museum programming supervisor. She has worked at the museum for years, leading tours and collecting stories shared by visitors and staff alike. The 19th century poorhouse system was born from a mixture of compassion and control. Communities needed somewhere to send those who could not care for themselves, but being admitted to the poorhouse came at a cost. They lost their freedom, their dignity, and in many cases, their family.
The process of being allowed to go into the House of Industry and Refuge was pretty strict. Because it was owned by the county, you had to be a county resident. It was also an industrial farm, so once you were admitted into the poorhouse, you weren't just staying there, but you were expected to help out with chores, whether it be in the building, on the farm, in the orchard. But it was a building that was built for the purpose of looking after people who were unhoused, who physically could not look after themselves or get a job, who were sick at Guelph General Hospital, and the Guelph Hospital needed the beds back. So sometimes they would send some of their patients to the poorhouse to stay here for a couple months. It was people who had aged and they weren't able to look after themselves, people who were blind.
Surviving records paint a stark picture. They documented each new arrival with clinical detachment, name, age, and reason for admission.
On a registration book, there's even a section that describes why someone would have been admitted into the poorhouse. And the language can be quite shocking, simply because of the time period. So we have sick, blind, destitute, but we also have words like idiotic and lunatic. So these are people who physically or mentally were incapable of looking after themselves. And the county provided a place that they could be looked after, they could get food in their belly, they could have clothes on their back.
For some, the poorhouse offered a temporary refuge, a place to survive the winter before returning to work as a farmhand in the spring. The lucky ones found temporary shelter before returning to the outside world. But for others, it became a final destination. Perhaps no aspect of the poorhouse's history is more heartbreaking than of the children. Early on, families could stay together. An unwed mother could be with her children. Widows could keep their sons and daughters by her side. But in the 1890s, everything changed.
When we opened in 1877, you're allowed to be an unwed mother, bring your kids if you need to. Totally fine. You can stay with your family, that's okay. But it changes in the 1890s. Legislature changes. And there's this weird social idea that if you're in a poorhouse, you're morally deficient in some way. So we don't want kids to grow up in that. So when legislature changes, suddenly kids are not allowed to be in a poorhouse. They have to leave.
The new policy was devastating. Children were forcibly separated from their parents and were available for adoption, but not as children being brought up in loving families. They were adopted as labor.
Unfortunately, there was a system that if you were an unwed mother or if you were a family member coming with a child, you could stay with that child for a certain amount of time, but it was required to adopt those children outside of the poorhouse. And it is very likely, in most cases, you would not see your family again. And I don't mean adopted into a family, like not as someone who wants to adopt a child into their family. It's more so a domestic hand or a farm hand. So there's someone who live on the property, they get food and they get clothing, but they are working. They're providing for the family. They are not necessarily a part of the family.
Once a child left the poorhouse, they weren't checked on. No social workers visited, and no records were kept. They simply vanished. Their fates are unknown. Some were treated well.
So in the case of this little girl, we have a picture, and she is in this really fancy, beautiful dress with big blonde pigtails, and she's in the middle of the frame with her family surrounding her and her stepmother or adoptive mother right behind her. So I like to think that she was spoiled rotten because she was the only girl.
But others were not so fortunate.
Then on the flip side, we do have stories of one particularly, Julia. She came with her mother, her two brothers, and her mother was pregnant at the time. All three of them were adopted out. The boys worked as farmhands. They did okay. I think they both fought during the First World War. Julia, though, was adopted out as a domestic hand multiple times, was brought back every single time. And in our records, it says that something's just not right with Julia. We have no idea what that means. But she could have just been very unhappy. But regardless, she grew up at the poorhouse. She was a domestic hand multiple times, but always came back. She became an adult. She lived here with her grandmother at one point, and she died within our walls. So she never left. She was always at the poorhouse.
Julia wasn't the only soul trapped in the cycle of the poorhouse. Another notable resident was Jane Lewis.
She's probably my favorite person to talk about. She's very unique in that she was sponsored by the city of Guelph to come to and live in the poorhouse, which didn't happen often. You had to be a County Wellington resident technically, but she started off living in Toronto. She got mixed up with the wrong crowd, started becoming a muscle of the Bushbrook Gang, which is a very famous gang in Toronto.
The Bushbrook Gang operated in Toronto during the late 1800s. Their method was simple and brutal until one night things went terribly wrong.
Their whole shtick was that they would find men that looked like they had money, and the girls in the gang, they would go flirt with them and take him to the Don River Bridge where they'd knock him out, steal his cash, and then go to the bar and drink all the cash away. And then they would go sleep in the bush. So Jane was a very important figure in this gang, apparently, and she got charged with murder, but everything after this point, take with a grain of salt, because it does come from a testimony of someone who testified against her. So we don't really know if she was offered anything. But as the story goes, she and this young girl, they see a gentleman in a nice suit. He's been around town for a bit. They're not entirely sure what he does for a living, but they know he has money. So they go up to him, they start flirting, they go for a walk through Toronto, they end up down at the Don River. And at that point in history, Toronto does have hydro, but not everywhere. So they have hydro at like the end of the Don River Bridge, but not through the middle of it. So they start walking across the Don River Bridge. They get to the middle. Jane turns to her friend and says, "Why don't you go wait for us at the other end? Like, we'll meet you in a little bit. I want to have a private conversation with this guy."
What happened next was told through testimony at trial.
So she leaves, and in her testimony, she says she doesn't see what happens next, but she hears what happens next. And what she hears is a little bit of chatter, a scuffle, an exclaim of surprise, a thwack, and then Jane comes running over with a wad of cash in one hand and a rock wrapped up in a handkerchief in the other. So they've just knocked out this guy, they have some cash. Now the guys are supposed to go pick up the person they knocked out and go hide him in a bush to sleep off the being knocked out. So the guys come up to this gentleman. Jane and her friend, they hear the next part of what happens, which is another exclaim of surprise, a big scuffle, and then a splash. And the guys come running over, claiming that they just murdered this guy and threw him into the Don River.
The victim was a prominent figure, an MP from Grey County, and the gang was arrested, tried, and convicted.
Jane goes to jail for about 2 months. The leader of the Bushbrook Gang is apparently the last person to be publicly hanged in the city of Toronto, which is pretty crazy.
After her release, Jane fled Toronto, but her life never got easier.
And after Jane gets out of jail, she's too hot. She knows she's got to leave. She can't stay in Toronto. So she comes up to Guelph and hangs out in Guelph. And over the course of the time of her living there, she gets sponsored to go in and out of the poorhouse on multiple different occasions because she's destitute. She's not able to look after herself. She's aging. And eventually, on her last visit to the poorhouse, she passes away in our walls. She has no family, so the county looks after her. They bury her at the pauper cemetery. And in our records, this is the part that's crazy, because she's on the memorial. So I always ask people to try and find her on the memorial. When you do find her, it will say that she is over 100 years old, which is so incredibly wrong. The first time that she is admitted, she's 66 years old. When she dies, she's probably in her early 90s or late 80s. But she probably looked like she was 100 years old because she smoked a lot, she drank a lot, she had a hard life, she was destitute a lot. So she looked like she was 100, but she was closer to like 92 or 93, I believe, when she passed away.
Without a helping hand or outside means of support, she ended up within its four walls. For those who couldn't find a way out, there was only one final destination: the pauper cemetery. If you walk down a winding path through tall grass to the edge of the property, you'll find one of the most unsettling places in all of Wellington County.
So we have 271 people who are buried on our property. So if someone passed away, they have two options. Either you have family that can claim your body and you are buried elsewhere, which happens quite a bit. If you double the 271, that's about the amount of people that died on our property. And half of them were just claimed and buried in other parts of Wellington County. But for those that either were not claimed or they were not able to afford a burial, then the county would take on the responsibility of respecting that person and burying them in a pauper cemetery.
Walking through the cemetery today, you won't find rows of individual headstones or names carved in marble. Instead, you'll see decade stones, a cold slab made of granite that marks the years and the number of dead found below.
So our pauper cemetery, if ever you get a chance to visit, we always recommend people to go there. It will not look like a cemetery you're used to. The markers that they had were not like beautiful individual stones. At first, we used wooden crosses, and we would write the names on or have little plates. And then eventually that transitioned into iron rods. And when we shifted from the poorhouse to the house of the aged, we transitioned out of burying people on our site. But with all the change, the cemetery kind of got worse for wear. So a lot of, nature's going to nature. So the wood rotted, the iron fell over, got buried with earth. So now there's what I like to call decade stones. So they'll have a certain date range, so like 1877 to 1892, I think is the first one. And it will say 89 dead. So you get a visual idea of how many people may be buried there, but there's no individual stones, no individual markers.
Today, a memorial stands listing the names of everyone buried beneath the earth, their ages, and where they came from. A final attempt to remember those the world forgot. That's because Wellington County Museum and Archives attempts to preserve this history. And it's never more pressing that history is built by those who came before us than when visitors walk through the cemetery. No matter where they step, they're walking on someone's grave.
It does freak a couple people out because no matter where you're walking in the cemetery, you will be walking on someone's grave. And some people are superstitious.
And they have good reason to be, because according to staff, not everyone who died at the poorhouse has moved on. Some have heard strange sounds and unexplained creaking floors in the old dormitories. Some have been called to from empty hallways, and one particular voice is not to be trusted at all. Now, here's where history ends and something else begins. Because, as I mentioned, there have been reports of something deeply unsettling at the Poorhouse. It's what makes it different from most haunted locations. We know who these people were. We know they lived here. We know many died here and were buried without markers. It isn't folklore. It's documented. And so, our journey starts with the ledgers, or I should say, those who kept them. Margaret Griffin, with her husband William, served as the matron and keeper of the Poorhouse. They lived within the building itself and raised a family there. Margaret was well known for her firm but fair hand. She ran a tight ship, ensuring that everyone was where they needed to be, that chores were completed, that order was maintained. And anyone who spends any time at the museum knows that she can still be seen walking the halls.
The stories that we have stretch all the way back from the 1970s, when we first opened as the Wellington County Museum, before the archives was opened. And we have some stories in there of people seeing full apparitions. This is before we had any renovations inside the museum. So we had the original staircases, nothing had changed too much. And at that point, people would be here late at night and they would see the most common person that people claim to see is a full apparition of Margaret Griffin.
Margaret Griffin was more than just an administrator. She was the heart of the Poorhouse. She ensured people were treated with dignity and even provided moments of joy by bringing in musicians and artists to entertain those living on site. Margaret saw the people in her care as human beings worthy of respect.
Margaret Griffin was one of the most famous matrons that we have here at the Poorhouse. She was a manager of the site, essentially, with her husband, William. And they also have the longest tenure, so they have their fingers in lots of pies here. But apparently she was very, very strict and wanted to make sure that everyone was where they needed to be at certain times. She had a firm but also a very gentle hand when she needed to. But there's apparitions of her going up and down the stairs, like the original staircases.
Many believe Margaret Griffin's remained behind because she never truly finished her work. Or perhaps she simply cannot bear to leave the people she spent her life caring for. Either way, she is still here, still watching and making her rounds. And Margaret Griffin's isn't the only one. Visitors agree that one of the spookiest locations at the museum is the former dormitory located on the upper floor.
My personal favorite is in the old men's dormitory, which is now hilariously a children's play space. But that is known as the most haunted room in the building. People have walked in there, they smell people smoking cigars. They've seen, when it was an active gallery space, there were rocking chairs in there, and people have seen the rocking chairs move when they shouldn't be moving. The upstairs itself seems to be the most active.
The dormitory was where people slept, men on one side, women on the other. Beds were crowded together. Privacy was non-existent. Disease spread easily, and death was a constant companion.
Whenever we have people visiting, whether it be for tours or their own paranormal investigations, that's the place where they like to go. That's where people hear things the most, where they see things the most. We've had people document seeing shadows and shadow men moving down the hallways and across the doorways. There's various voices that people have heard underneath their audio, one of which has always sort of been a big question mark for us, because they talk about, there's two guys and they're talking about, like, do you smell that? Like, that smells really weird. And then in their audio, it's someone saying they gotta run because it's on fire.
Fire. The voices captured on the audio seemed certain. Something burned here once. And whatever happened, someone or something is still trying to warn people about it.
So we started to look it up to see if we could find if there had been a fire that broke out in the poorhouse at any point and what that may have looked like. We haven't found any documentation as of yet, but I wouldn't be surprised.
While Katie looks for hard evidence of a fire, people occasionally report something else. Not fear, not panic, but a sudden, overwhelming sadness, as if, for a brief moment, they're feeling something that doesn't belong to them. While that unexplained phenomenon is hard to classify, there are others that are less subtle. One of Katie's colleagues, Mike, had always been a skeptic, but that has since changed. Mike was leading a group through the museum when something unexpected happened.
He did a paranormal investigation with a group. It was his first one. And he had started here relatively, not too long ago at that point. And we have a security system we have to call and be like, hey, we are going to be setting the alarm late. This is around the time we think we're going to set it. And they make a note. He was terrified of messing that up because they have to call maintenance then, and then they have to drive in and make sure everything's okay. So he's taking these people around. They go into the old men's drawing room. They're going through the gallery space. They're talking about this, that, and the other thing. And the galleries have really creaky old wooden floors, but the hallway is carpeted, which is important to the story. So they're in that room, and then suddenly they hear footsteps. And Mike's like, oh, God, I messed it up. So he calls down. He's like, Aaron, I'm so sorry. I messed up the alarm. I'll give them a call. Don't worry about it. Just go home.
Mike assumed a security guard had arrived to check on them and waited for someone to appear in the doorway.
He doesn't call back or anything, but they hear the footsteps coming closer, and all of them turn to the doorway expecting Aaron to walk through, but instead they just hear the footsteps transition from carpet to wood, and there's no one there. So immediately the group was like, we're out.
The Wellington County Museum and Archives preserves these stories with care. They know the records they keep are there for anyone to read. Names, once forgotten, are now spoken again. But if the accounts from staff are to be believed, some of those people are still trying to be heard, and they are not to be trusted. Of all the spirits said to inhabit the Wellington Museum, there was one that staff speak of with genuine ease. A little girl. She has been seen, or rather, sensed, near the programming offices. No one knows why she lingers, but visitors who claim to be sensitive to the paranormal have all delivered the same warning.
There's a hallway that I work in that a couple visitors who have who are more sensitive and they've done investigations before, they've always told us that if you see or hear a little girl, don't talk back to her. Don't trust the little girl. And I'm like, excuse me? What does that mean? And it keeps on popping up every now and again.
Multiple sources over the years have all said the same thing. Don't engage with her.
Like where the cup exploded is where the little girl potentially could have been. We have people get married on our site as well. And one of the strangest things that's happened in there, they were in the kitchen that's just below our hallway where this little girl potentially is. And they're cleaning up after themselves. These two women are facing away from each other, and they hear a little girl laughing.
It was midnight, and the wedding reception had ended hours earlier. Everyone had gone home. And yet, from somewhere in the empty kitchen came the sound of a child's laughter.
And they at first thought, that's weird, but they both heard it, and they ended up calling our front desk staff, our administrator, Kim, and they were just like, is that normal? Should we have heard that? because it freaked them out so much that they heard this little girl at midnight laughing away when everyone had left. So I don't know who that is, but I don't trust it. And I don't want to meet this little girl that we're not supposed to trust at all.
Despite the warnings, Katie says that most of those who have investigated the museum's paranormal activity have come to the same conclusion. Whatever lingers there is not evil.
What's fascinating to me is that anyone who has come in who claims to be sensitive or is a medium or contacts beyond the veil, they have always told us that nothing about it is nefarious. It's all just people being people. Like, they're not happy to be here, but they're not super angry about it. They're pretty neutral, which I'm okay with.
The spirits of the poorhouse are not vengeful. They're not malicious. They're simply stuck. People who died in a place they never wanted to be in. People who were never properly mourned. Today, Wellington Museum embraces its reputation. Cemetery tours run every October, drawing visitors from across the region who want to hear the macabre stories of poorhouse life. Murder mystery events bring historical figures back to life and sometimes death. And paranormal investigators regularly request access to the building after hours.
It's a strange way to put it, but it's gateway drug. It gets people excited about history.
For Katie and her colleagues, the ghost stories are more than entertainment.
I think it's an accessible way to get people through the door. It's something that people can relate to, whether they be a skeptic or not. I find people are fascinated by the things they don't understand. So if I can get people through the door and they're interested in ghosties, and I sneak a little history in there about what is a poorhouse, the people that lived here, the stories of their lives, that's great, and I want that.
The Wellington County Museum and Archives closes its doors every evening, leaving this grand limestone building alone with its memories. In the Pauper Cemetery, 271 souls lie beneath the earth. But the dead have their own idea about being forgotten. They are still here, walking the halls, laughing in empty kitchens at midnight. Not angry, not evil, just unwilling to go. And if you ever find yourself walking through those limestone doors and you feel something shift in the air around you, just remember one thing. Don't talk back to the little girl. Thank you for joining me as we explored Wellington County Museum and Archives, and a big thank you to Katie Clark for taking the time to talk with me. I really do appreciate it. If you want to check out the museum, I will link their website in the show notes. Do you have your own ghost story, paranormal encounter, or true crime? If yes, email it to me so I can cover it and share it with all the listeners on this podcast. Email me through the website hauntedcanada.com. Haunted Canada is sponsored by the Edmonton Ghost Tours. I will link the website in the show notes. Haunted Canada is written and produced by me, Nadine Bailey, with senior producer Dila Velasquez. Production and sound design is by Rob Johnston with help from Corey Price. If you would like to support this podcast, please follow, share, and tell a friend about the podcast. We would also appreciate a like and a 5-star written review. If you're on Spotify, tap follow. It helps more people find these Canadian ghost stories. Also, you can follow me under different social media platforms, including TikTok and my YouTube channel, Haunted Canada. Thank you from all of us at Haunted Canada and Curious Cast. Have a good night, everyone, and stay haunted.